The grand hall fell into a heavy silence, so thick it seemed to suffocate the air. The king's spokesman stepped forward, his voice cold as steel. "Silence!" he echoed, his words cutting through the tense air like a blade. All eyes turned toward the man standing at the foot of the royal throne, Mr. Ozigbo. The spokesman's voice boomed again, shattering the fragile calm. "Who are you?" Mr. Ozigbo, trembling yet determined, dropped to his knees, preparing to speak. But the king, from his elevated throne, lifted a hand, a single, silent gesture. "Rise," commanded the king in a low but firm voice. "Speak your piece." Mr. Ozigbo stood slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. His voice, though measured, quivered with the weight of the moment. "Your Royal Highness," he began, locking eyes with the monarch. "You summoned me, and here I am, my lord, to answer your call." The king leaned forward, his piercing gaze never leaving Ozigbo. "You know why you're here," he said, his voice dark and measured. "You know it is not possible for your daughter to marry the prince of this kingdom. You are not of the royal blue bloodline. You are the poorest of the poor in this land. And as you well know, by our sacred traditions, the prince must marry a woman of royal descent." The king's words hung in the air like a death sentence, his spokesman nodding in grim agreement. "You know our laws, Ozigbo," he continued. "Your father's history is well known to us all." For a moment, Mr. Ozigbo was silent, his hands balled into fists, not from fear but from frustration. He took a breath before speaking, his voice steady this time. "Yes, I am poor," Ozigbo said, his tone carrying both defiance and dignity. "But I am not ashamed of it. Poverty is not a crime. I have lived my life with honor despite the circumstances. Wealth does not determine the worth of a man. The same blood that runs in your veins runs in mine." His eyes flashed with conviction. "As for whether my daughter will marry the prince, that decision lies with the custodian of this kingdom, His Royal Highness, the King." The hall seemed to freeze at those words. The spokesman bristled at Ozigbo's boldness, his lips curling into a sneer. "Do you dare to question tradition? To question the will of the throne?" But Ozigbo stood his ground, eyes never leaving the king. "I question nothing but the chains that bind us," he said. "Tradition is not infallible. It changes with the times, or else it dies. Is it not the king's duty to guide us forward?" The room stirred. Whispers swept through the gathered nobles, the air thick with tension. The king leaned back in his throne, his eyes narrowing as he studied the man before him. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence stretched on, suffocating, until finally the king spoke. "Tradition may rule us, but it does not blind us," the king said slowly. His voice, though quiet, carried a weight that silenced the murmurs. "It is not a matter of wealth alone, Ozigbo, but blood, the blood of royalty. Your daughter does not possess that lineage." Ozigbo met the king's gaze head-on, his voice rising, emboldened by the truth he carried in his heart. "Royalty is not just a birthright. It is earned in the way we live, in the values we uphold. My daughter may not have royal blood, but she has a heart worthy of a prince." The hall grew still. Even the spokesman seemed momentarily taken aback by Ozigbo's resolve. "And what is more important, Your Highness?" Ozigbo pressed, taking a bold step forward. "Blood or character? Wealth or love?" The king's eyes flickered, something almost unreadable crossing his features. For the first time since the audience began, the king seemed to hesitate. "May you live long, our king," Ozigbo added, his voice a quiet challenge. The court awaited the monarch's next words, the fate of his daughter, and perhaps even the future of the kingdom, hanging in the balance.